Hey again, continuing some of our discussions of cultural anthropology and looking today at kinship systems. Just like the other things we've talked about, we're studying cultural anthropology through the lens of intercultural communication and really studying intercultural communication through the lens of cultural anthropology at the same time. But this is another one of the areas of the study of cultural anthropology that helps us to kind of dig into it a little bit. Kinship systems. Kinship is the most important and most complex of social systems. All human groups have adopted kinship terminology, rules, and expectations. It impacts lives more than any other aspect of culture. Now understand, kinship systems vary widely from culture to culture. There is no one way of defining kinship, no one way of saying this is how kinship works, because each culture has a means of defining these identity, these answers, these questions. They have a different way of identifying, well, who should one marry? Well, oftentimes one should marry is defined by what your kinship is. Within some cultures, it's somebody marrying somebody who is within their kinship system, and that's the right person to marry. And other cultures, if they're in your kinship marriage, you're not allowed to marry them. You have to marry someone outside your kinship structure. So that's a very important issue related to kinship. It helps to identify who should be shown respect, and what level of respect each person is supposed to be shown. These are defined by the kinship systems. We'll look in a few minutes about some kinship structures in which certain members of the family are to be respected over and above other members of the family. They are your primary person that you show respect to and such. It defines who can be counted on in a moment of crisis. There are some that are very tightly woven kinship structures in which a person, if you are inside this bubble of the kinship, you know, and how big that bubble is varies. There's some kinship structures that are very large bubbles, and there may be 100 people in your kinship structure that if they have a need, you're expected to respond to it. You may only have 15 people. You may only have 5 people that if they have an issue, you're expected to jump and run to go help and take care of them. But once again, a kinship system help us to determine who is it we have to count on and who we have to respond to in a moment of crisis. And of course, kinship also helps us to define such issues as inheritance rules. To whom is passed down property, finances, to whom is passed down titles, to whom is passed down certain levels of authority within a clan and such. So, you know, as Westerners, when we think of inheritance, we think primarily of money or of actual physical items. Inheritance in other cultures has to do with who gets the title, who becomes the new chief or chieftain or whatever else. Those inheritance rules are often determined by kinship systems. And this is very important to understand. In many societies, it is not who you are, but who you are related to that provides others with a sense of your characteristics and attributes. Now, as Westerners with a very individualistic, matter of fact, I would say that in the past 20 to 30 years, we've crossed over individualistic and we've crossed into a hyper-individualistic worldview. But because we are Westerners, we have this individualistic worldview, we think that people ought to be judged only by who they are. We should be judged strictly by I am me, and who my parents are doesn't matter, and who my grandparents are doesn't matter, and who my brothers and sisters are, and who my cousins are. None of that should matter. I am me. As a matter of fact, it's still a challenge for me sometimes speaking to people of younger generations, because anytime that they want to introduce themselves, I always ask them for their last name. And I do that because I'm trying to get context. Not that I'm going to judge them based on their last name, but I want to know, do I happen to know your dad? Do I happen to know your mom? Do I happen to know people within your family structure that would create an affinity, create some sort of connection for me with you and them? And that's especially true within the intercultural service world. We often, I know 150 missionaries. And if I'm greeting a person who may come from that background, I ask, well, what's your last name? And then I say, well, and who was your mother? Oh, okay, well, I know so-and-so and so-and-so. That's your aunt? Oh, that's cool. So, but see, and it's not that I'm judging them based on that, but there is this understanding of connection that happens there. And it's especially true in some cultures that if you are of a certain clan, of a certain group, a certain person is your uncle, that either means, oh man, you've got it all going on, you're amazing. Or it means, oh, you're part of that group? Oh my goodness, well, see ya. And it really is true. People would have to do something above and beyond the call of duty to ever break free of the negative weight that is put on them by the family. And they'd have to do something exceptionally stupid to break free of the positive influence that they have because of their parents. I've got a video link there that I will also upload, and it's basically it's actually a radio show, but it's got the radio show with the words written underneath it. And it's a young woman named Yolanda Charlie who was voted to be Miss Navajo one particular year. And the reason it's even in there is because in her first 30 seconds of the radio show, all she does is go through a list of, my name is Yolanda Charlie, I'm at such and such group of the clan of such and such, my mother's brother is such and such tribe, my mother's grandfather was such and such tribe and such clan, and the whole first 30 seconds of her radio interview is her telling, here is who I am, here is how I fit in to the overall Navajo culture, and that way people can identify her as, oh, okay, well, she's part of this group and part of that group, and that puts her here and puts her there, and that means she's this and that. And that's true in most cultures, that people are identified and are, people, basically they judge them. They make their first impression of that person based on what family or what clan they're a part of. Modern societies, especially in our industrialized and really in America, our post-industrialized cultures, they have weakened the family structures because we now have a market economy where it doesn't really matter if my dad was it wouldn't matter if he was a multi-millionaire. I might end up, being taken care of. But it doesn't matter if my dad was a guy who picked up the garbage on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That really doesn't affect my ability to go out into the market economy and find a job that might make me become a person of wealth and influence. I was the first person in my family lineage to get a bachelor's degree. I was the first one to get a master's degree, I believe. I'm pretty sure. I'm the oldest cousin, so I tend to be. And I was the first, and there was another cousin of mine, but around the same time, to get a doctoral degree. Now, my dad, who happens to be an absolute genius, didn't finish high school. His fact that he didn't finish high school had no effect on me getting a doctorate, because we have a market-driven economy, and I was able to achieve different levels than my parents did, and there was nobody looking at me saying, you can't do this because your dad was this or that. Now, I understand my dad was very successful as well. It's just he wasn't book learning successful. But nonetheless, our familial structures have been weakened because we don't have to depend so much on our families, and we've got social services that are provided by the government. We have Social Security, we have Medicaid, Medicare, we have all of these social services that are provided for by our governmental system that in years past and in many other countries, those are the expectations of your kin. If a person becomes ill, the family groups together and takes care of them or provides for their medical the finances for their medical care. If a person gets aged and they get too old, it's the children's responsibility and the family's responsibility to take care of that old person. There's no welfare program. There's no retirement benefits. Your retirement benefits is the fact you had 6 kids. And those 6 kids take care of you when you get too old to take care of yourself. So, as I said, you can see how this kinship in our culture has become less important. But please understand that if you leave the U.S. and you leave our Western culture, you are often going to go into places where this kinship identity is incredibly, incredibly important as part of how they run their structure. Within our culture, the nuclear family household is currently the fundamental institution responsible for rearing children and organizing social interaction. In reality, the nuclear family, the husband, wife, and the children still is the fundamental institution. But, and you can see the second part there, in the non-industrialized societies and the societies that are not industrialized or post-industrial, there's a larger level of participation by people who are not part of that nuclear family. Kinship that is outside, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandmothers, grandfathers, all of this type of stuff, they have more of an effect and more of an influence on the children raising and on the organizing of social interaction. And in truly, pre-industrial societies or non-industrial societies, that the family unit, and once again, understand that 150 years ago, 200 years ago, in our society was this way as well, is that the kinship unit was a basic unit of production. Families had a farm, and everybody, aunt, uncle, cousin, brother, sister, everybody's working that farm. Or there was a home business. They were the ones who took care of all the weaving, and that group took care of all the weaving, and the aunts, uncles, well, that'd be all the aunts would do that, and all the uncles would be out gathering the flax that was then turned into basically, everybody was part of this production. It was the political representation. It was even a religious body. Most worship that took place, whether it was worship of a particular religious group or worshiping of spiritual beings, ancestral spirits and such, took place within the kinship group. And once again, there would be a person who would be specified to be the elder. And the elder, one of their jobs was to keep the ancestral spirits happy and things like that. So you can see how this kinship identity was so important. And as I said, please understand that outside the U.S., you will still be entering many places where kinship identity and that kinship structure is very, very important to people. And look just for a second, there are actually, and this is anthropological terminology, there are 3 different types of kinship. One is called affinal or affinal. I hate it when I don't know how words are pronounced, but affinal relationship, that is the relationship that you have by marriage. So, I am in a kinship group with my wife and with her sisters, with her mother and father before they passed, with her sister's children. That is a affinal relationship. That is me being tied to them because I am married to her, therefore they are also part of my kinship group. Consanguine is my relationships that I have, the kin that I have, that are related by blood. That means they are my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, my brothers and sisters' children, the people that are part of that family. Those are called consanguine kinship. And then there's actually what's called fictive kinship. Now, fictive doesn't mean it's like imaginary. What it means is these are individuals that are not related by birth or marriage, but have an emotionally significant relationship with another individual and would take on the characteristics of a family relationship. And once again, in many cultures, this fictive relationships are just as important as your marriage relationships or your blood relationships. The fictive relationships, I know within certain cultures, you have 100 cousins. And the truth is, about half of those people are not actually blood or marriage cousins. They're just the friends of the family's children, and they're all called your cousins. That's a fictive kinship, but you might find out that they are just as important to your life and to how you function as a person who is either blood or married in. A lot of people have aunts or uncles. They call aunt and uncle, but they're not their aunt or uncle by any blood or by marriage, but they are a godparent. They're your dad's godparents, and therefore they are your aunt and uncle, even though they don't share your last name, don't share any historical kinship as far as fitting in blood-wise. They're a fictive relationship. But those fictive kinships are oftentimes just as important as the actual family kinships in many, many cultures. Once again, one of the reasons for understanding kinship is to understand where is the bloodline reckoned. What type of descent is there? What type of, and also this has to do with how things are passed down from generation to generation. In the U.S., most of us have what we call bilateral descent, meaning that if we look back, if we do our family tree, we tend to immediately do our mother's side and our father's side. So we consider it bilateral descent. And technically, if there was inheritance involved and stuff like that, we might receive inheritance from a grandfather on my mom's side or grandfather on my dad's side. There's not a separation. But many parts of the world, there are unilateral descent rules. When a person talks about their heritage, they talk about their background, it's patrilineal, meaning it is only the male lineage that matters. You would trace your father's lineage through his father, through his father, through his father, and that is who you are. Also, if things were being passed down, it would be, you would only the male child would receive anything that would come because they're part of that lineage, whereas the female child would be considered part of another people's lineage because she's married into another family. There are some descent rules, there are some places where there is matrilineal descent, but that is less common, but the same kind of deal. It is considered to be you are the child of your mother and their mother's mother and the mother's mother beyond that, and that's who you are as a person. And so that's just a little bit of difference of how different cultures may view that. Now, there are different ways of diagramming kinships. Oftentimes, and what we're going to look at just a little bit, is E.L. Shusky's system, and he's an early anthropologist, well over 100 years ago, that developed this system, where he was able to show the distinctives of different cultures' views of kinship. And he did this by creating these code letterings to allow you to define who you were and who your relationships were and how you identified those relationships. Now, a couple of terms we have to understand first of all is the ego. Ego, of course, using that terminology means you. If you ever see the word ego on a kinship system, that's you. That's where you fit in to the kinship system. There's a term called family of orientation. The family of orientation is the family that you were born into. It's your mom and dad or the people that you spend your growing up years with, and that's where your brothers and sisters would be. That's your family of orientation. And then the other term is the family of procreation. That's the family that you, when you marry, you create the family of procreation. That is your family that you have through marriage or having or adopting children. That's your family unit. So that's just important to have these terminologies in your mind there just for a second. And once again, here's the interesting, and this is where we're going to get to in just a second, because I'm going to take you through just a couple of these diagrams here in a second. It's interesting to note that the terms of reference and address vary based on the value of that kinship role in a culture. Okay, let me explain what that sentence means. What that sentence means is, I have, in my culture, I have one mother, and my mother's sisters are called my aunts. My father's sisters are also called my aunts. My father's brothers' wives are also called my aunts. Okay? They're all called aunt because they all have an equal value in our cultural understanding of kinship. Now, there are cultures in which, and we'll see this on a chart here in just a minute, that there are cultures in which I have my mother, and my mother's sisters are also called mother. And my father's sisters are called mother. But my father's brothers' wives are called aunt. Yes, it's confusing, and I don't know what I would do in that situation. But in those cultures, those who are part of the females who are part of your direct blood lineage are equally as important to raising you as your mother, and therefore they're called mother. We'll talk about that more in just a second. But just be aware of that. We're going to look at a couple of charts here in a second. Don't worry about memorizing this, but this is the chart that Shushki came up with to diagramming things. He created big letters and letter combinations to describe, to be able to chart out who somebody was in a family. So like you can see mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, all that kind of stuff, husband, wife. But the interesting thing is you go over to aunt. Within our culture, our mother's sister, our father's sister, our mother's brother's wife, and our father's brother's wife are all called aunt. Okay, that's our Western, unless of course you grew up in a different cultural system that doesn't do this, but that's your stereotypical Western culture. Okay, my cousins are my mother's sister's daughter and mother's sister's sons, and you can see it goes on like that. But that's a way of designating kinships by using these terminology. Oftentimes, what other people do, though, is they designate kinships by the use of these kinship charts. And tell you the truth, oftentimes what you have is you have a kinship chart, and that it also uses these code letters along with it. But this is actually 6 different kinship charts that helps us to explain and understand how these people are listed differently. I've already mentioned the top one on the left there, the Hawaiian kinship chart. That is the one where my mother, and you can see ego there. Ego is me. My mother is called mother. My father is called father. My mother's sister is called mother. My father's brother is called father. And my mother's brother is called father. And my father's sister is called mother. All of those people are called by the same identifier. They don't have aunts or uncles. They are all equal to you as far as they all have the right to discipline you, all have the right to teach you and train you, and they are all responsible for you. They would literally, you would go to your father's brother just like you would go to your father, and he would be able to help you or to discipline you or whatever else. Now you move to the next one, the Iroquois. The Iroquois have a situation where, once again, you've got you're the person in the middle there. Your mother's sister is also called mother, and your father's brother is also called father. But your mother's sister's brother is not called mother. I apologize for that. I wish it were possible to turn off my phone while I made recordings, but the office doesn't allow for that. But what I was describing here in the Iroquois relationship, your father's, even though your mother's sister is mother, your father's sister is not. Your father's sister is called aunt. And even though your father's brother is called father, your mother's brother is called uncle. And it gets even more confusing because you go down a level. I didn't go down a level on the Hawaiian one, but we'll go down a level on this one. You can see a comparison there. In the Iroquois system, your brother and sister, of course, is your brother and sister. But the children of your mother's sister are also called brother and sister. And the children of your father's brother are called brother and sister. But the children of your father's sister are called cousin. And the children of your mother's brother are called cousin. Are we confused yet? Well, we won't even go into the other ones. You can feel free to stop and look at these if you would like. But you can see they get even more convoluted as time goes by. And you can see how there are mother's sister, father's cousin, brother. I mean, kinship is very complicated. And when a person, okay, and I've done this before. I've talked to someone from another country, and they will say, oh, yes, I have 18 brothers and sisters. And I go, wow, that's a lot of kids. How did they do it? Ta-da! Look at this chart. Of course they have 18 brothers and sisters because everybody I call cousin, they call brother and sister. Now, there are actually people who have 18 brothers and sisters who are physically their brothers and sisters. That does happen. But oftentimes this is a cultural misunderstanding that we have, because they call people brother and sister that we would not call brother and sister. I mean, you get down to just one more I want to show you down the bottom right, Omaha tribe kinship. I think this is one of the more interesting one, because you have a situation where you have a mother, and then your mother's sister is called mother. Your uncle is not called father. Your mother's brother is not called father. He's called uncle. But if your mother's brother has a daughter, she's called mother too. Okay. Anyway, I'm just showing you all this, not because we're going to spend the next 6 weeks. Matter of fact, this lecture is almost over, and this is all we will talk about it. But be aware of the fact that kinship systems are very complicated, and they're often very different than what we experience. So when you're communicating with people, one of the things I would do if you're crossing into another culture is to dig in a little bit to their kinship situation. So you get an understanding. When they're talking about a cousin, is it a real cousin or is it a fictive cousin? When they're talking about brothers and sisters, are they talking about the same, that they both came from the bodies of your mother and father? Or are they talking about everybody that we would call cousins, they're all brother and sister in their culture? It's important to understand those things so you can get a better understanding to communicate. So very, very interesting things. We talked a little bit about these different issues, but I really feel like that this kind of helps you get an understanding of kinship and how kinship works. I hope this has been of value to you, and we're going to continue digging in further into culture and to anthropology, and also how we're going to be looking at these things and how it's going to help us to be more effective in communicating the gospel to people as we work in this world.